asked Leslie Hotsfeld to come and share with you. Leslie's one of our staff members and a very capable and compassionate staff member. And she made her first trip to General Conference. She was there as an observer, and I wanted her to share with you what she experienced as an observer for the first time at General Conference before I share with you the final vote and what that represents for the church. I've also asked Leslie to say a word to you about her responsibilities on our staff. Sometimes we're not aware of the tremendous responsibilities that many of our staff people have. We could not have a more gifted, committed person than Leslie serving as she does in this part of the body of Christ. Leslie, come and share with us your impressions of General Conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Bishop, and I appreciate y'all, or the Bishop, inviting me to come and speak with y'all today. I love getting to meet with classes. I don't get to do that very often in my role. Can you all hear me okay? And so this is always a special treat. From time to time, I will get to come and spend a little bit of time with some of our adult classes, and it really is a treat for me. A couple of things. Before I even introduce myself, I have to say that hymnal that Lee led us from, I have sitting on my piano along with the Cokesbury, the little thin brown one that some of you may remember. I learned to play piano out of those books, and they are treasures to me. So that might tell you a little bit about my upbringing. I was born into the United Methodist Church and have been in it for my whole life, and so it's just a part of who I am, and I'm very grateful for that. So as Joe said, I am on the staff here. I've actually been on staff, I'm kind of scared to say this out loud, for 22 years. I started when I was 12, so. But in my current role, my title is Executive Director, and one of the things that means is that I just get to work with an amazing staff of people. We really have such a great team of folks here who pitch in and do whatever we can to help the mission of this local church come to be to further the kingdom of God, and so I'm so grateful for that opportunity. So a few quick specifics about what I do. I kind of see three buckets of responsibility that I have. One is to really manage the day-to-day operations of the church, and as I say all of this, I will always go back to team. I don't do any of this by myself, I couldn't, and so grateful for team. But I manage or kind of oversee our HR responsibilities, finance, facilities, IT, and communications. And so when I think about just sort of the behind the scenes infrastructure of the church, I have some responsibility to help support that. I'm also the primary liaison with our two campuses. We have one in Spring Hill, our Trinity Church, and then one in Nolensville, the Village. And I work with both of those campus pastors, and they also have a direct tie to Davis as the senior pastor, but I help work with them, again, with some of the day-to-day managements of the campus, of those two campuses. And then the third, and really what I see as my primary role, all of those other things flow out of that. And it's really for me to be right next to Davis and just do whatever he needs me to do so that he's able to do the role that only he can do in preaching and teaching and casting vision for this incredible local church. And so I try to just do what it is that he needs from me to help manage church-wide initiatives or take care of some of those details so that he can spend his time on those other things. So love to talk to you about spreadsheets and all that, but we can do that on another day. But speaking of spreadsheets, so when Bishop Pennell asked me to speak this morning, and it really was an interesting, really interesting and learning experience for me to go to General Conference. And I have a lot more than 10 minutes that I could share, but I won't. But I was really looking forward to the experience. As I said, I've been a lifelong Methodist. I'm very familiar with our structure. In my role here, I have to be very familiar with the discipline and the rules and the legislation that guide the work of the church. And so to be able to see some of that process in action was going to be really interesting for me. I am very much a process person, and so all of that stuff kind of intrigues and interests me, and so I was looking forward to it from that perspective. Honestly, I was a little bit in trepidation about it as well, because it's an important meeting. And this had some really important decisions to be made for our institution that we love, the United Methodist Church. And I went in very well aware of the anxieties and the hard work and the prayer that had led up to both the call of this special conference and then the conference itself. And so honestly, I was feeling a little bit excited and interested, and then a little bit unsure of what was going to happen when we walked in the door. And so I'll just briefly talk you through the 4 days, and from my perspective, kind of my experience and those feelings that I felt. We arrived the first morning, and walking up to the convention center where the conference was to take place, there were people all along the sidewalks. Some were handing out gloves, some were handing out candy, some were handing out information sheets. And so they were representatives of different groups who wanted to have a voice over those few days. And so before you even get into the conference setting, you were already hearing from these different voices and people who felt very passionate about whatever their ideas were about what the work that needed to be done there. The first day, and from what I understand, Bishop Pennell, this was the first time that a day of prayer like this had been held before a general conference. And I have to say that it was worth the trip to be a part of that. So we were observers, and so it was like at the Bridgestone Arena, if you've ever been there. It was this huge convention center or conference center. The delegates, the bishops, the presiders were all on the floor, and then all of the observers were in the seats, seated all around the arena. And so there was a little bit of a distance. It felt a little disconnected, and that's okay, because the real work was on the floor of the conference. But even as an observer, as we looked around at the people in that room, the idea of a global church and a connectional church was just palpable. I mean, that was such an incredible experience to be in prayer and worship. We heard about the mission that's happening all over the world. We also heard about the concerns happening in different places, and they were all very different. You know, we're very different from some of our brothers and sisters in other countries. But we all worship the same God. We all prayed and praised the same God. And that was a beautiful experience, and one that I will always remember and always treasure. The next morning, the Commission on the Way Forward, the special commission that was put together, gave their presentation of their work. And they started at the very beginning talking about how those folks were identified, what they first did when they came together, get to know each other, spend a lot of time in prayer, and they talked through that discernment process that they used to get to the place where they were ready to present their recommendations to the General Conference. And as we heard those voices and the prayers and the litanies of that group, again, it was, the feeling was one of compassion and care and hope, is what I felt as they made their presentations. You know, like all of us sitting in this room, I didn't agree with everything that I heard, but I also appreciated everything I heard, and I appreciated the work and the way that it had come to that point. And so that whole morning was really special and meaningful to me, because I thought, this is the way the church is supposed to work. This is what we do. We go off and we pray and we study and we love one another, even in the midst of our differences. And then I'll have to say, it was like the lights went off and the lights came on, and there was a whole different feel in the room when we began the legislative process. And I think part of that is probably normal, because it's a legislative process. It's not a worship experience, and so there's a difference. It made me appreciate our annual conference that happens in the sanctuary, because I think that the surroundings really add to the experience. We were sitting in an arena where, you know, they had sports events happening, and so it didn't feel like a sanctuary. But it was very palpable to me. In fact, I asked someone who I knew had been to several general conferences, and I said, after we'd gotten started into the legislative work, and I said, this just feels different to me. It feels so different from yesterday, and it's all the same people in the room. And I asked this person sitting next to me, I said, I know you've been to a lot of different general conferences. I said, which is the way, does this feel like a normal general conference, or what we did yesterday and this morning? And they said, yeah, it kind of feels like we feel right now. This is kind of what it's like. And I was like, oh. So I guess, to be honest, I had a little bit of a disappointment. At the same time, like I said, I'm a process person. I understand that we need legislative. We need to have a way that we can work together. It was interesting to see how the different bishops and other delegates presided through the meetings. I felt like they all stepped into their role, recognizing the importance of the role and the information and the business that they were presiding over. There were very different ways of presiding. Bishop Palmer is one that I will always remember, because I just felt like through the whole thing, he was very, very respectful and very pastoral in the way he led through every conversation. And I felt that from him. And I didn't know any of the presiders personally, so it wasn't that I liked one and didn't like another. I really had great respect and appreciation for all of them. But I just thought that was worth noting, that even in the midst of the business, he had a way to preside from that pastor's heart that I really appreciated. One of the interesting things that was happening around the scenes, if you will, around the sides, and I recognized that we weren't getting a true picture because we weren't delegates and we weren't on the floor. But we would hear things about late night meetings and a lot of positioning and strategy about, well, because they said this, we're going to say that. And it felt a little bit like I was watching Congress and not, you know. But I do know that our legislative body was formed after our country's legislative body. And so, you know, it's just overall, I'm grateful for the experience. I hope we have another one in 2020, and I hope we learn a lot from what happened in this one. I believe that I left there, and I'm going to wrap up right now because I know you have a lot of good information to share. You know, I had a lot of emotions over the weekend, and a lot of the people around me did as well, ranging from frustration to confusion to fear to sadness. I will say that on the final day, the only way I know to describe the feeling that I felt, and I've had some conversations with others, was almost a feeling of grief. In fact, someone looked at me and said, I feel like I'm at a funeral. And I think that came from a recognition of, these are my own personal feelings, so I'm not speaking anything on behalf of the church or the United Methodist Church, but I thought, you know, the church as we know it is never going to be the same. We have experienced a fracture of some sort, and I don't know what that means long term, but there was just a little bit of it. We have to grieve that, or I had to grieve that. But at the same time, I know that this church is made up of people like the people in this room. And I know that we can find a way, and God will make a way where there is no way, right? And so I firmly believe that, and I think we've got a lot of work to do. I'm so grateful for the leaders in this local church and in our conference and around the world. I think that we have just a special way to be together with our brothers and sisters in many different parts of the world who believe such vastly different ways to implement our faith, and yet we all worship the same God. And so that's really what I left with in the midst of the sadness. It was a real hope that we're going to be okay. We're going to keep loving people, and we're going to keep being in mission, and no legislative process can stop that. So.
Listen, you mentioned you got a big staff. How big is the staff of this church?
Well, it depends on, if you talk about, you've done this to me before, and I'm not afraid of notes. I can't remember the exact number.
It was over 100.
Yeah, we have around 120 staff members that are on our local church staff and our 2 campuses. We also have 2 schools who have teachers. And so if you count all the teachers, there's a little bit more than that. We have 2 preschools full-time here, but a lot of those are part-time. We have a lot of seasonal employees that work in our nurseries, like around Christmas and Easter and those things. So I'm counting all of those people. So a lot of folks.
You still have volunteers?
Oh yeah, we have volunteers all over.
Express your appreciation to Leslie for coming. Thank you for sharing from your heart and from your experience as an observer at General Conference. As you heard me say before, there were 864 delegates, 42% from outside the United States. In some parts of the world, the United Methodist movement is growing and growing fast, which means that those parts of the world are having more and more delegates to the General Conference. Hot button issues are not new to the United Methodist Church. The issue of slavery divided us until 1939. It's interesting that the then Methodist churches in East Tennessee stayed with the Northern Church, and the Methodist churches in Middle Tennessee and West Tennessee stayed with the Southern Church. We had one congregation in Clarksville that stayed with the Northern Church, but we were severely divided over slavery until 1939. We did not ordain the first woman in ministry until 1956, and that caused a great deal of feeling in the church. We still have congregations that will not accept a woman as a pastor. When I was serving as bishop in Virginia, we had congregations that just would not accept a woman who had been called of God, who'd been ordained, who'd met all the requirements, but no. Quick story. At one church in Virginia, I met with the Pastor-Parish Relations Committee. They said, send us the worst pastor in the conference who's a man before you send us a woman. Well, I sent a woman. And she was, and when it came time for her to move, I went and met with that committee again. And they said, whatever you do, do not send us a man. Well, that was a big issue in the church. And then we kept all of the African American churches in a central conference until 1968. Prior to 1968, Gordon Memorial, for example, in Nashville, did not belong to the Tennessee Conference and did not participate in the Tennessee Conference. It belonged to the Central Conference. And we had all of the African American churches in a conference unto themselves until 1968. We've also had situations in our history where some people have pulled away from the church to help establish other denominations, so that issues, difference of theological opinion, difference in geography is not new to us. However, this is the issue that is before us now, which has to do with homosexuality. In 1972, the General Conference put in our Book of Discipline statements about homosexuality. The first statement said that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And then later General Conferences specified that by saying that persons who were self-avowed practicing homosexuals could not be ordained in the ministry. And then the discipline went further and said that our sanctuaries could not be used for homosexual weddings. So with the passing of time since 1962, the issue has tightened in our Book of Discipline. Every General Conference, we have petitions about this issue related to homosexuality. And there's great feeling in the church that our Book of Discipline should be amended so that, let me share with you where we are now. What happened at the recent General Conference? Amid the growing concerns for the denomination's future, the 2016 General Conference authorized the formation of a commission to deal with church teachings on homosexuality and find ways to help the church stay together. The commission on the way forward submitted proposals that were considered by the delegates at the 2019 special called sessions. Delegates to the General Conference include equal numbers of lay and clergy members elected by annual conferences around the world. 4 lay and 4 clergy delegates to General Conference were elected by the Tennessee Conference that meets in our sanctuary. Bishops preside and facilitate the work of the delegates, but bishops do not have a voice and bishops do not vote. The General Conference is the only body that approves church polity and speaks officially for the denomination. So what was decided at this called session of the General Conference? The General Conference delegates passed by 438 to 384 vote what is called the traditional plan. This plan retains restrictions against self-avowed practicing homosexual clergy and officiating at or hosting same-sex marriage ceremonies that requires a stricter enforcement for violations of church law. The one church plan, which would have left questions of marriage up to individual churches and clergy, and ordination requirements up to conferences, was defeated. The one church plan simply said, we're going to take all of the restrictive language out of the Book of Discipline that pertains to homosexuality. And we're going to let each local church decide if it will permit same-sex marriages or not. So the one church plan would take all of the discriminatory language out of the Book of Discipline and let local churches make decisions about the use of its facility. But the traditional plan passed, meaning by the traditional plan, the Book of Discipline as it is now. But it also added more restrictions to the Book of Discipline as it is now. Such restrictions as an expanded definition of self-avowed practicing homosexual to include people living in same-sex marriage, domestic partnership, or civil union, or is a person who publicly states that she or he is a practicing homosexual. The creation of a council relations committee as part of the Council of Bishops to hold bishops accountable to restrictions related to homosexuality. Minimum penalties for clergy convicted at trial of performing same-sex weddings. These penalties include 1 year suspension without pay for the first offense and a loss of credentials for the second offense. The requirement that boards of ordained ministry examine and not recommend candidates who do not meet standards regarding sexuality. It also empowers bishops to rule a candidate out of order. The requirement that annual conferences certify only Board of Ordained Ministry nominees who will uphold, enforce, and maintain the Book of Discipline related to ordination and marriage of practicing homosexuals. The General Council on Finance Administration will withhold funds and the use of the Cross and Flame logo for conferences that fail to do so. Multiple changes to the complaint process under church law. These changes include requiring that bishops not dismiss complaints without reasons given, involving those making complaints in the just resolution process, allowing the church to appeal areas of church law or the administration of church trials. The delegates also approved an exit plan for churches that want to leave the denomination with their property. Local churches that elect to leave must pay unpaid apportionments and all pension liabilities. 2 petitions were approved that had to do with pension liabilities for clergy. If you would like to read more about the plan and all of the amendments, you can go to unitedmethodistchurch.org and find your answers. Summaries and overviews and other resources about the traditional plan and each of the other proposals is available on the 2019 General Conference website. Also, the traditional plan legislation takes effect January 1st, 2020 for all churches in the United States and 12 months after 2020 for general conferences outside the United States. You need to know that delegates voted by secret ballot. The voting system generates final results based on a tally of all valid votes. There's no record of how individuals vote. The number of delegates was set at 864, about 58% from the United States. Each annual conference elects its lay and clergy members from among its members. The number of delegates assigned to each annual conference for 2020 has been announced. Can the 2020 General Conference change the outcome? Yes, it can, because petitions will continue to come. And one General Conference cannot, a general conference can disagree with a previous General Conference. You can go online to ask the United Methodist Church any questions you have about this or any other topic in the United Methodist Church. So you see, the General Conference, by a narrow vote, took a conservative position on matters related to homosexuality. Now, I need to say that there are many people in our church who are very hurt. I know that at Vanderbilt Divinity School, I met with United Methodist students this past week. And some of our students are very hurt by this decision. And they're trying to decide whether to stay with the United Methodist Church or not to stay with the United Methodist Church. Also, we have homosexual people in our congregations who worship with us every Sunday and who are very much a part of the life of the church. This congregation, as far as I know, has always been welcoming to homosexual people. When we're putting committees together, say the finance committee, we don't ask a person what's your sexual orientation. Instead, we decide based upon other criterion. So whereas the more conservative theological side of our congregation is very pleased with this decision, there are people in the United Methodist Connection who are very upset with the decision the General Conference made. Now, I believe there will be a United Methodist Church. I believe that we will come through this not weaker, but stronger. Those issues that I mentioned to you earlier that have been a part of our history, every time we've worked our way through those, we've come out stronger and not weaker. So in just a summary, that's what happened at the General Conference. Let me take any questions you might have.
Go.
Oh, sorry, Mike.
As large as this church is, this many members, why didn't we have delegates, voting delegates?
To the General Conference?
Yes.
Leslie, did we have anybody to self-declare as a candidate? In order to be elected to General Conference, you have to offer yourself as a candidate. And in this church, we did not have any person, lay or clergy, to offer themselves to be a candidate. That's the reason. Yes.
Do we have anybody who is offering themselves for the 2020 General Conference?
The annual conference, it meets in June. We'll be electing delegates for the 2020 General Conference. And I do not know if we're going to have, do we have any people who are going to self-declare?
I think we will. There are conversations.
Okay. apparently there are conversations among some of us about offering, yes.
Who would decide whether or not they are approved or not approved?
Well, it's just a matter of a person, let's say, for example, that one of our clergy would like to be a delegate to the General Conference. Then there's a process you go through to get your name on the ballot. Historically, the senior pastors of this church have been delegates to General Conference. I know James King has been a delegate, Bob Spain was a delegate, I was a delegate, and in our history, there have been several senior pastors who've been delegates. And Bob Sullins was a delegate to one of the General Conferences as a lay person. But I do hope we'll have some lay people and clergy who will offer themselves. I saw a hand back here, yes.
We're talking about a Christian body making decisions. How did some people get in pretending to be delegates and cast votes who really were not delegates casting votes? Where is that gonna go? And I understand that may not change. There may not have been that many delegates that would have changed that decision that was made, but I'm sure you are aware of that.
Well, this issue that she's mentioning just really surfaced in the last few days. It appears that there were some people in the African delegation who somehow got certified and cast votes when they were not officially delegates. There's an ethics committee with the General Commission on the General Conference right now that's reviewing that question. Yes. And I think I understand it was 4 people who did that. Right. Yes, sir.
When you were speaking, I kind of heard there was some language that affected or was
Rich,
concerning.
would you stand up so they can hear the question?
There was, I think that you said there was some language that said that candidates were gonna have to meet certain criteria in terms of whether they were supportive of the conservative position. And so that seems to limit the candidates that might be approved.
For a General Conference?
Yeah.
No, that, if I said that, I didn't mean to. What I was referring to there is that if a person's a candidate for ordained ministry, they have to agree with the positions in the Book of Discipline, not a delegate to General Conference. Yes.
I misunderstood.
Yes.
What was the margin in the vote? I mean, like 90-10 or do we know?
50 votes.
Yeah, it was only 50 votes, passed by 50 votes, or 52 votes, I think, yes. Yeah, it was a very close vote, yes.
My concern is our church. Speak up. My concern is our church, Brentwood United Methodist. How is this expected to affect our church in any way? Maybe Leslie can speak.
She's saying she's concerned about Brentwood United Methodist and how is it going to affect our congregation. Leslie's closer to that than I am.
We are, well, I'll say a couple of things. First of all, and if you've been hearing Davis preach or, sorry. Okay, all right. I think that Davis has been leading us, well, regardless of the General Conference, but we're really all about our mission. And so that's what we're trying to stay focused on, is our mission and who we are as a church trying to make a difference, transformation in the world. And so that's not going to change from that perspective. He's also shared some through e-notes, and there have been several Refuel, which is our Wednesday night teaching time. Last Wednesday night, I don't know if any of you were able to be there, but Davis and Laura Brantley, one of our lead associate pastors here, spent some time sharing really a little bit of what we've heard this morning from Bishop Pennell, just the results, what happened at the General Conference and what those results were, and kind of next steps for the church at large and for us. and I don't want to speak for them. I would encourage you, one of the things that we are working on right now is I'm working to edit the video of that, and then there were also some audio recordings of 2 previous refuels that we are going to make available on our website. So we're working very hard just to get those in a cleaned up format so that we can post them, and so watch for that, and we'll have that, we'll make some announcements about that. We are just trying to be open. We're working very closely with Bishop McAlooly and with other churches in our conference to try to continue to be faithful to the mission and also be respectful to the United Methodist Church and really allow the process to work. And I don't know if you want to speak more to this, but in April, the changes that were approved are going to go before the Judicial Council, and then they will determine which pieces of these are constitutional or not. And I believe it's after that, then it's formalized into the discipline. And so we are continuing to allow the process to work and try to be faithful to that at the same time as we're trying to just discern where God is leading us as a congregation as we continue to move forward. I can't say it differently other than we're going to be committed to our Wesleyan foundations in the United Methodist Church as we explore how God is working through all of this.
Leslie.
She mentioned the word Judicial Council, and,
I have a question to Leslie.
okay, question to Leslie.
Judicial Council, will that be secret vote like it was in?
I'll let Bishop, he can answer that better
Yeah.
than I.
We have, in the United Methodist Church, we have what is known as a Judicial Council. It functions like the Supreme Court in the United States. The Judicial Council reviews all decisions made by a General Conference to see if they are constitutional or not. In the Book of Discipline, there is a constitution, and whatever is decided by a General Conference has to be constitutional. So everything that happened at this past General Conference now goes to the Judicial Council, which meets the 23rd of April, and they will review everything that happened. If something is unconstitutional, the Judicial Council can rule it out of order. Yes. I see a lot of hands. Yes, Diane.
You may have said it and I missed it. Could a Methodist minister do a wedding outside of the church?
No.
No, they just can't.
Right. See, over here and then over here. I'm gonna go from side to side. Yes.
The Judicial Council, and I don't mean to be humorous or
No.
negative or anything, are they attorneys or are they just looking at the Book of Discipline when you talk about legality?
Yes, they are, Judicial Council is made up of 7 people representing the globe. And they are appointed by the Council of Bishops. And we really spend a lot of time identifying people who are capable of understanding our Constitution and weighing everything that is in it. So they are not attorneys. However, there might be an attorney on the Judicial Council. I know of one attorney that did serve on the Judicial Council, but they are appointed by the Council of Bishops, and they simply review what the church does. And then also the Judicial Council, when I was presiding in Virginia, I made a decision one time that some people in the annual conference did not agree with. So a person came to the microphone and made a motion that my decision be referred to the Judicial Council. It took a 2/3 vote to send it. The Virginia Conference took a 2/3 vote and sent it to the Judicial Council, which is a very important thing to do because it keeps us lined up with our Book of Discipline. Yes.
Is the Judicial Council made up of all of ladies?
No, Judicial Council is made up of clergy, 7 clergy
All clergy.
and 3 lay observers.
And where will this be held?
You know, I'm not sure where they're meeting. I haven't paid any attention to it. I really haven't.
But it's a global.
Yes, they represent the global church. That's right. Yes, Jack.
Joe, are the 3 lay members on the Judicial Council, are they voting members?
No. They're observers. Right.
What was the vote among US delegates?
We don't know that because the votes are private and they're done electronically. And so we don't know how individuals voted. My hunch would be that if this was left up only to the United States, it would be a different vote. Yes.
I'm just still kind of amazed. I guess I cannot understand with the church, the size of our church, that none of the clergy, I mean, is there something behind,
No.
something behind the scenes?
No, there's not.
Is there
It's just,
and knowing how critical, you know.
yeah. Well, I would like for this congregation to be represented at the General Conference, and I hope that some people will say, I'd like to be a delegate to General Conference. As I said, historically, we've had delegates.
Joe,
But
some people will self-nominate.
part of the problem is, Janine's reminding me, as she often does. Part of the problem is, and Leslie may disagree with this, but a lot of people don't want to self-nominate. Because then you put yourself out there. When I was serving in this conference, no one self-nominated. The nominations just came from the floor. But is that part of it, Leslie, that people are a little hesitant to self-nominate, or how do you read that?
I would agree. I think that's part of it. I think also one of the interesting things this year is when we elected delegates for the General Conference for 2016, we had the opportunity to elect new delegates for 2019, but this conference chose not to. So we just let the same folks who served at the 2016 General Conference go this time. And so we weren't thinking particularly about this issue. Is that correct? And when we were electing those individuals. One thing I will say, I serve on the annual conference design team, and we've had a lot of conversations about this nomination process. And one of the things that we've added this year is a nominated by line on the application for those people who really don't feel comfortable in putting themselves forward but are willing to serve, and so they're able to have them be nominated by someone else, so it's not just them putting themselves out. So we're hoping that that'll help not just this church but our conference.
I think we've got time for one more question. Bill?
Well, while we're on it, could you talk a bit about how one would go about preparing himself to qualify on a self-nominated basis for self-conference or
Yeah, Joe.
delegate?
Well, I feel like it would be an individual who would have a deep commitment to Christ and to the church, and would be passionate about the direction of the church, and would be very active in the local church, but would want to be a part of the general church. And to be a person who would try to understand the book of discipline. But I think also it would depend upon the nudging of the Holy Spirit. If you feel nudged by the Holy Spirit to be a part of the General Conference, then it would be wonderful to move in that direction. One more question, then we've got to move.
Okay, I just
Carol.
wanted to segue to another part of the conference. Was there any discussion about the anti-Israel movement of boycott, defense, and sanction that the church supports?
No, this called session was only about this one question. Yes, yes.
Tell them that all these delegates that we have, somebody a rule, and they can outvote us.
Yes. And Janine's pointing out that the Tennessee Conference is made up primarily of rural, small churches. And every church has a delegate. As the pastor who's the delegate and a lay person who's the delegate. Well, all of the small membership churches have a lot more votes than the large or mid-size congregations. And so that makes a difference too.
Do they exercise it?
Yes, they do. Yes, Evelyn, I said one more, but you've got to let Evelyn speak.
Is there any vehicle within our church that if someone did self-nominate or were nominated by someone else, that they can get the feelings of the congregation, where it's not voting their own personal feelings?
Yeah, she's, would it need to be a representative person is what you're saying? Yes. I don't know if we have anything in place that would help that or not. Not that I know of. Well, friends, one comment, then we'll go to prayer concerns. If you read the 15th chapter of Acts, a council had to be called to decide who could be in the church and who could not be in the church. So go home and read Acts 15. Issues, theological issues, are in the heritage of the Christian church. If they were not, we would just be one body and would have been historically. Finally, the issues are theological issues more than they are pragmatic issues. There are some people who believe that all of us are created in the image of God. Therefore, we're all kin to each other. And there are others who believe that homosexuality is a sin. Those who view homosexuality as a sin tend to see the church one way. Those who believe that all are created in the image of God tend to see it another way. Now, we will be a United Methodist Church. We'll be committed to Christ. We will care about those who've been pushed aside. We will continue to baptize and to receive people into the body of Christ.
Joe, how many times in the Bible does it say judge not?
Judge not that you be not judged is a very important biblical teaching. It is. It's central to the teachings of Jesus.
Obviously not.
How many times does it say love your neighbor?